Have you ever noticed that, for many people, the moment that should represent a financial victory ends up being exactly the point where everything starts to fall apart? Imagine reaching that coveted $100,000. For years, that number has lived in your head as a symbol of freedom, security, respect, and tranquility. You think that upon reaching that amount, something automatically changes. Less worry, more control, more power of choice. But what if I told you that, for most people, this milestone is not the beginning of freedom, but rather the start of a silent trap? Have you ever experienced this? The curious thing is that nobody warns about this risk. On the contrary, society as a whole reinforces the idea that accumulating you $100,000 means I made it. The brain interprets this number as a trophy, a sign of mission accomplished. And that's exactly where something dangerous happens. A feeling of relief arises, the tension decreases, and decisions begin to be made. Automatically, you start thinking differently, acting differently, allowing yourself choices that previously seemed impossible. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. In the realm of personal finance and wealth building, $100,000 holds a special place. It's not a small amount of money, but it's also far from representing true financial independence. Yet, the brain doesn't perceive it that way. It associates this amount with status, stability, and security, creating a false sense of control. It's as if a switch is flipped internally, and you think, now I can relax. And it's in this relaxation that many get lost. Almost no one realizes it, but the biggest financial mistakes rarely stem from scarcity. They stem from comfort. When money starts to appear, behavior changes even before any conscious strategy comes into play. Expenses are more easily justified, decisions seem safer than they actually are, and the fear of losing what has been achieved begins to outweigh the desire to continue growing. You feel you are protecting your money when, in reality, you may be trapping it. This is the myth of the $100,000, the belief that the number, by itself, transforms your relationship with money in a positive way. But the truth is more subtle and more uncomfortable. Money doesn't hold anyone back. What holds you back are the behavioral patterns that emerge when you believe you've reached a safe place. That's when many people enter a financial plateau without even realizing it, convinced they're doing well, when in reality they've simply stopped progressing. Perhaps you've already felt this, or perhaps you're very close to that point now. What happens after that milestone doesn't depend on the amount itself, but on the invisible choices that begin to be made from that point on. And that's exactly what we need to talk about before moving forward, because there's an almost imperceptible line between using $100,000 as a foundation for building or transforming that number into a comfortable prison that few admit to living in. And while you listen to all this, maybe something inside you is stirring. Maybe you're remembering decisions that seemed right at the time, or that moment when you reached a number that was always symbolic for you and felt you could breathe a sigh of relief. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far. It doesn't have to be anything. Elaborate. Sometimes a sentence says a lot. When you share your experience, it's not just about you. Many people are reading, silently identifying with it, realizing they're not alone at this point in their journey. And if at any point you thought, this is exactly what I'm going through, or I'd never stop to look at it from this angle, liking this video is a simple way to say that. It seems small, but it helps this content reach more people who are also stuck in this same stage without knowing why. Your interaction here makes a real difference in the reach of this conversation. If you feel that this type of reflection is important, that there's a lack of discussion about financial behavior, invisible decisions, and building real wealth, subscribing to the channel is almost like saying, I want to continue on this path. This channel grows when like-minded people meet, share experiences, and move forward together, without easy promises or illusions. The idea here was never to point fingers or say there's only one right way, but to create an honest space to discuss what almost no one talks about when the subject is money. And the more people participate, comment, and get involved, the stronger this message becomes. Because, in the end, understanding what happens after $100,000 isn't about numbers. It's about choices that seem small, but change everything. And it's from here that this conversation starts to get even more interesting. There's a curious moment in this financial journey when nothing seems to go wrong, But at the same time, nothing really progresses. It's when the bills are paid, the balance no longer scares people, the $100,000 mark brings a constant sense of stability. And yet, something begins to stagnate inside. It's not a visible collapse, not a glaring mistake. It's an invisible prison that builds itself little by little, almost with good intentions. The person doesn't feel trapped. They feel finally safe. And that's precisely where the danger lies. The rise in living standards is often the first brick in this silent chain reaction. Small comforts begin to seem deserved, justifiable, even inevitable. Internal logic changes without asking permission. Before, every decision was carefully considered. Now, it comes accompanied by phrases like, I can, I deserve it. It makes no difference, but it does. Not in the short term, not in a scandalous way, but in the accumulated impact, in the transformation that fails to happen. The money keeps coming in, but the ability to multiply it begins to diminish. At the same time, a new, more sophisticated fear emerges. The fear of losing what has already been achieved. It is no longer the fear of scarcity, but the fear of regression. And this fear disguises itself as responsibility. It presents itself as prudence, as maturity, as sensible decisions. The person begins to choose the path that protects them, even if that path leads nowhere. Growth begins to seem too risky, and stagnation starts to sound comfortable. This is how the comfortable 100K zone is formed. This zone doesn't hurt. It doesn't scream. It doesn't generate immediate despair. On the contrary, it soothes. It's a place where life goes on functioning, where everything seems under control, where no one from the outside would say there's a problem. But inside, something gets heavier and heavier. The feeling of progress disappears, motivation diminishes, and the journey becomes maintenance. Maintaining what you have becomes more important than building what could exist. The most uncomfortable thing is realizing that this prison wasn't created by a lack of information, nor by bad luck, nor by external factors. It stems from common, socially approved decisions, reinforced by those who look from the outside and say, you're doing well, and maybe you are. You're just not moving forward. This is a hidden truth that almost no one likes to face because it requires looking at one's own mindset, at the behind-the-scenes aspects of daily choices, at the silent impact of avoiding discomfort. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject because understanding why so many people get stuck at this point isn't just about money, but about identity, about how we see ourselves after achieving something significant. There's an internal transition that needs to happen, and it almost never happens on its own. Before continuing, leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a specific point in this journey that almost no one names, but which defines everything that comes after. It's the moment when accumulating money ceases to be enough, and money itself begins to demand something different from you. No more effort, no more basic discipline, but maturity. This is where the metaphor of the shark gate comes in. It doesn't appear with signs, it doesn't make noise, it doesn't announce its arrival. But when you get close, you feel it. Something changes in how decisions weigh on you. Up to that point, accumulating wealth was about consistency, control, and avoiding obvious mistakes. It worked. You reached $100,000 by making prudent choices, following simple rules, and protecting each advance. But from there, the game silently changes. Continuing to do exactly the same thing doesn't lead to the next level. And that's a hidden truth that bothers people because it forces an internal transformation. The shark door doesn't open for those who only want to preserve. It opens for those who understand that building wealth requires navigating uncomfortable zones. Staying outside that door seems sensible. There, everything is predictable. The money is protected. The risks are known. The feeling of control is constant. It's the territory of better not to touch, of it's not worth the risk, of I've come far enough. But this side also has an invisible cost, the cost of not evolving. The impact doesn't appear on the bank statement. It appears in the stagnation of the journey, in the repetition of the same results year after year. Crossing the shark gate, on the other hand, is neither an impulsive act nor a blind gamble. It's a change of mindset. It's accepting that volatility is part of growth, that uncomfortable decisions are inevitable, and that a long-term vision outweighs immediate relief. It's understanding that responsibility increases along with capital, and that protecting everything can mean preventing any real expansion. This crossing doesn't make you reckless. It makes you strategic. What separates hoarders from wealth builders is not intelligence, nor luck, nor access to secret information. It is the willingness to cross that internal threshold. Before the door, the focus is on not making mistakes. After it, the focus becomes building something greater than the very feeling of security. It's an uncomfortable revelation because it exposes that many responsible decisions are, in fact, choices of emotional self-protection. When that realization starts to sink in, your mental clarity shifts. You begin to see money not as an end in itself, but as a tool that demands commitment. The journey ceases to be purely financial and becomes one of identity. Who do you need to become to handle the next level? What kind of decisions have you been avoiding in the name of tranquility? These questions don't arise before the shark door. They only appear when you're standing before it. If all of this resonates with you, comment below. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because there's a specific mistake that appears at exactly this point in the journey and that costs much more than money. It costs time. The fatal mistake at $100,000 isn't losing everything. It isn't going broke. It isn't making a disastrous decision. It's something much more silent and, precisely for that reason, more dangerous, treating this amount as if it were a final asset when it's still just capital under construction. When someone reaches $100,000, the natural instinct is to protect it. And protecting seems like a virtue. It seems like maturity. It seems like responsibility. The person starts organizing everything around this idea. Don't touch it, don't risk it, don't expose it, don't make mistakes. Every decision begins to be filtered by the fear of ruining what has been achieved. But in this process, something essential is forgotten. Money that is idle, excessively guarded, loses its ability to generate impact. It doesn't disappear, but it also doesn't evolve. Excessive caution creates an illusion of progress. The balance remains unchanged, generating a false sense of advancement. But in practice, what's happening is merely maintenance. It's like someone who reaches a certain point in their journey, sets up camp, and spends years tending to the tent, convinced they're still traveling. The journey becomes vigilance. Each step toward growth seems too dangerous, too complex, too uncertain. This is the moment when safe decisions begin to accumulate. Nothing seems wrong in isolation. On the contrary, everything seems sensible. But the multiplier effect, the one that truly transforms capital into wealth, is blocked. Money stops working for real because fear takes control of the strategy. And the cruelest part is that this happens without fanfare, without crisis, without shock, just with the passage of time, not going through though. Sharkgate has an invisible cost that almost no one accounts for. Years that will never return. Years in which capital could be learning, making mistakes, adjusting, growing. Years in which mindset could be expanding along with responsibilities. Instead, the person remains at the same level, repeating decisions that have already served their purpose in the past, but no longer work for the future. There's a hidden truth here that's quite unsettling. Overprotecting is also a risky choice, but it's a comfortable risk, socially accepted, rarely questioned. No one criticizes those who didn't want to take risks. But no one sees the silent impact of this on building something bigger. The money doesn't disappear, but its potential dissolves over time. This phase demands a change in attitude, not in the sense of recklessness, but of increased responsibility. Understanding that use $100,000 is not a trophy to be hoarded, but a tool that requires direction. The transformation happens when you realize that slowing down due to fear is also a loss. Not in a day, not in a month, but over the course of an entire journey. And when this realization begins to emerge, it doesn't bring ready-made answers. It brings unease, a feeling that something needs to change, even without it being entirely clear what. It is precisely at this point that the conversation begins to get deeper, because it's no longer about numbers, but about the internal decisions that define the next step. If this resonated with you, leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when $100,000 ceases to be seen as an end goal and begins to be viewed as a starting point, everything changes. It doesn't change explosively or immediately, but it changes from the inside out. This is where a new game begins, with different rules than those that brought you this far. The same attitudes that helped you accumulate wealth are no longer enough to build something bigger. And this is one of the hardest revelations to accept on this journey. After reaching $100,000, money starts demanding vision, long-term vision, strategic vision, vision beyond immediate comfort. It's no longer just about saving, economizing, or avoiding obvious mistakes. It's about understanding where you want to go and what decisions need to be made now to make that path a reality. It's a profound mindset shift because it forces you to relinquish the constant feeling of control in exchange for direction. Patience also takes on a different meaning. Before it was linked to the discipline of gathering, of waiting, of not giving in to impulses. Now it connects to the ability to sustain decisions that don't show immediate results. The impact ceases to be instantaneous and becomes cumulative. This is where many people get lost because they confuse the absence of a quick return with error. But in this new game, time ceases to be the enemy and becomes part of the strategy. There is also a maturing awareness of risk. It's not about seeking danger, nor about acting recklessly. It's about understanding that growing without any discomfort is an illusion. Every real construction involves some level of uncertainty. The difference lies in how that uncertainty is handled. Those who cross the shark gate learn to assess risks, not to avoid them at all costs. They learn to take responsibility for their own decisions, instead of outsourcing everything to the idea of security. This phase demands honesty with oneself. It requires looking behind the scenes of one's own choices and recognizing when the search for tranquility is hiding fear. And that doesn't make anyone weak. It makes them human. Transformation happens when this truth is faced head-on, without haste, but without self-deception. Because standing still is also a decision. And often, it's the most comfortable decision of all. In this context, the $100,000 ceases to be a trophy and becomes a gateway, a silent invitation to play a bigger, more complex, and more demanding game. This game is not for everyone, and that needs to be said clearly. Not everyone wants to deal with increased responsibility, with fluctuations, with choices that only make sense years later. But it's also important to recognize that remaining stuck at this stage is not something that simply happens. It's a choice made every day, even unconsciously. When that realization hits, something internally reorganizes itself. The journey takes on a different rhythm, a different depth. Decisions begin to be filtered not only by the fear of losing, but by the intention to build. And it is from this silent change that new possibilities begin to take shape, still diffuse, still in formation, but real enough to unsettle those who have already realized that there is something beyond. If you felt this shift in perspective while listening to all of this, comment below. I'm on this journey too. If you've made it this far, it's because this conversation made sense on some level. Maybe not in everything, maybe not in every word, but enough to keep you listening, reflecting, connecting the dots. And when that happens, it's worth continuing together. Subscribing to the channel is simply a way of saying that this type of content, direct, honest, and without easy promises, is useful to you, and that it makes sense to continue deepening these ideas over time. If you want, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me." It's not just so I know you've made it this far, it's also to mark this moment in your own journey. Sometimes, writing a simple sentence helps organize what's been echoing inside. And if this exchange created any connection, liking the video is a small gesture, but it helps this conversation continue to reach other people who are also at this silent point in their financial journey. There's a video over here that perfectly complements this topic and delves deeper into what comes after the shark gate. Click there and continue watching.